Hey guys, it's Adam from Premium Poker Tools, and I'd like to show you how this break-even percentage for bluffing the turn page works. So, as you can probably tell from the title, we're looking at what the break-even percentage is for bluffing on the turn. And let me back up a little bit to explain what I mean by that. So, a lot of people look at these numbers right here and maybe they pop out to you. What these numbers are how often a bluff needs to work for it to be immediately profitable for different bet sizes. So a half pot bluff needs to work 33.3% of the time to be immediately profitable. A 2/3 pot needs to work 40. A full pot needs to work 50. 2x needs to work 2/3 of the time. And maybe you've seen this risk divided by risk plus reward formula. So for half pot, you're risking 1 to win 2. So it needs to work 1/3 of the time. For a 2/3, you're risking 2 to win 3. So it needs to work 2/5 of the time, 40%. So that's where these numbers come from. And I think a lot of people are familiar with these numbers, and when they're looking to bluff, they think to themselves, am I going to get folds a third of the time? Am I going to get folds 50% of the time? That's the way a lot of people think. And people who are a little bit more sophisticated might realize that they don't need it to work the full, let's say, 50% of the time, or the full 33% of the time. Because let's say they're bluffing with a flush draw, they know they have a plan B to hit one of their outs, so they know to drop this number down. But from what I can tell, very few people know how much to drop this number down by. A lot of people just kind of make something up. So this tool is going to tell you how much can I drop the number down. So just as a quick little demo, if we have, let's say, 9 outs, the 33 became 22.6, and it dropped down by 10.7 percentage points. So by filling in these variables, you can figure out how much can I drop the numbers down. So let me explain that a little bit more. So when you bluff the turn, here's the way that I think about it. When you bluff, you can get an immediate fold, or they could call. Let's just ignore raising for now. Once they call, I think of it as if 3 things can happen. The first thing that can happen is that we hit an out. The next thing that can happen is that we get a scare card. And the third thing that can happen is that we just miss. So when you're bluffing, I think that plan A is to get an immediate fold. And I think that plan B is to hit one of your outs. And plan C is to get a scare card. So back to the immediately profitable, immediately versus, let's just say, the true number. The immediately profitable, e.g., let's say for a half pot bluff is 33.3. This only takes into account plan A. It assumes that if you get called, you just lose, that there's no other ways for you to win the pot. Whereas the true break-even percentage, this takes into account plan A, plan B, and plan C. It takes into account that sometimes you're going to hit an out. It takes into account sometimes you're going to hit a scare card. And what we're interested in is, how much does the 33 drop off? Does it become 30? Does it become 25? Does it become 20 or 15? So that's what this tool that I built is going to tell you. It's going to tell you how much does this 33 drop off. And in case it wasn't clear, let me just explain what a scare card is. So if we have a board of like 10, 8, 3, 2, if the river comes in ace, well, if your opponent is sitting there with Jack 10, with 10, 9, with 9, 8, they're going to be pretty, they might be hesitant to call because the ace kind of scared them. So, you know, when we talk about scare cards, we're talking about cards that we want to follow up with a bluff on the river. And usually that's an overcard. Sometimes it's a flush completing card, like someone with 10-9, if the flush completes, they might not want to call the river. So that's what I mean by a scare card. Okay. So again, what this tool lets you do is it helps you figure out how much do we drop these numbers down by. And you can plug in these variables to mess around with that. So first, let me kind of go over the way this graph works. So the horizontal axis of the graph is showing you how often they're folding to your turn bet. So like you're bluffing the turn. If they're folding 70% of the time, we're here. If they're folding 85% of the time, we're here. If they're folding 25, we're here. And the y-axis is showing what the expected value is. So for teal, it's the EV of bluffing. For black, it's the EV of checking. And I'm sorry I don't have labels. I'm going to have them eventually. Just the charting library I'm using doesn't work with labels. Okay, so that's the way this graph works. And quickly, I just want to mention that the break-even percentage is when the EV of checking is equal to the EV of bluffing. So the break-even percentage is where these two lines intersect. Because, like, you know, here the EV of bluffing is less than the EV of checking, so we'd prefer to check. Here it's the same, so we're indifferent. And once we pass this point, now, you know, we want to bluff, we want to bluff, we want to bluff, we want to bluff. So the intersection point, like past this point, bluffing is something we want to do. Once we pass this point, bluffing is more profitable than checking. So this is the intersection, that's the break-even percentage. Okay, so now let's kind of play around with some of the numbers. So let's assume that we have 4 outs. We have a gut shot. Let's talk about what this means. Extra money won on the river when you hit an out as a percentage of the river pot. So let's say that the turn, the pot size on the turn was 100, and let's say that we're betting half pot. So, you know, we bet 50, and we get called, and then the turn is 200. Then the river is 200, and let's say that here we had 7-6, so we had a gut shot, and the river was a 9, so we hit our straight. So in this situation, we have to ask ourselves, how much are we winning on the river? Are we winning $75? Are we winning $150? Are we winning $120? And obviously, you know, you're not going to have the same outcome every time. Like, sometimes you bet, you get called. Sometimes you bet, you get folded. Sometimes you bet full pot. Sometimes you bet half pot. But you have to ask yourself, like, on average, how much am I winning on the river? And you should ask yourself as a percentage of the pot. So, am I winning 60% of the pot? Am I winning 80% of the pot? What percentage of the pot am I winning on average? So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and say when you hit, you're going to win about 50% of the pot on average. And for now, let's just say that we aren't following up with a river bluff. So if we go back here, um, let's just look at plan B for now and ignore plan C. So the EV of checking, let's assume that we're in position and we check back, and when we hit, we also win 50% of the river pot. Or we can bump this up a little bit and say that when we check the turn, we're going to get paid off on the river a little bit more. So we can say 55 instead of 50. So now we can go back up here and kind of get our end results. So we can see that the 33 dropped down to 30. So it dropped down by 3. And the 50 dropped down to about 46. So it dropped down by about 4. So you can kind of remember to yourself that when you have a gut shot and you don't have anything else going for you, you can drop the numbers down by about 3 to 4%. And then you can play around some more and say, what happens when I have an open-ended straight draw instead of a gut shot? Well, now I can drop the numbers down by like 8 to 10. So back over here, we were asking ourselves, we know the 33 is the immediately profitable. How much do we drop that down by? So it told us that when we have a gut shot, we can drop it down by about 4%. When we have an open ender, we can drop it down by 9 or 10%. Okay, so that was plan B. We factored in plan B. So now let's say that we don't even have a plan B, and let's see what happens when we factor in plan C. So let's say that we don't have a plan B, or we don't have any outs, but we're going to follow up with a river bluff. So how many river cards are we going to bluff? Well, let's look at this example, 10-8-3-2. We bluff the turn and get called. I think that we can follow up the river with, if the river is any, like an ace, a king, or a queen, that, let's say that those are our scare cards. So there's 4 aces, 4 kings, and 4 queens. So that's 12 river cards that we're following up with. So let's say 12. Sorry, this is the wrong thing. Okay, so now it's going to ask us how big are we bluffing on the river, and let's just say full pot. So a full pot bet needs to work 50% of the time. Let's say that we're getting more folds than that, so let's say we're getting 60% folds instead of 50%. So now we can go and see how much is it going to drop off. So in this scenario, it's dropping off by 4 to 5%. The 50 became 46, the 33 became 28. And then we can go and adjust it and say, what if we have 16? So now it's going to go from about 6 to 7. What if we're getting folds 70% of the time? Well, now it jumped up, so now it's 13 to 15%. So again, it's not immediately obvious how much do we drop this down by. In some scenarios, we're taking 33 and we're dropping it down to 25. In other scenarios, we're dropping it down to 15% or something. So depending on these variables, you're going to drop down the immediately profitable number by different amounts. And that's what this tool is going to help you with. Okay, so we looked at factoring in plan B, and then we just looked at factoring in plan C. But now let's look at if we factor in both of them at the same time. And to give you a sense of, why you'd want to do that, let's look at this example here. So you have 7-6 on 10-8-3-2. Plan B is for you to hit your gut shot. So if you make a 9, that's a straight. But plan C is for you to get a scare card. So if the river comes to 9, you hit an out. But if the river comes an ace or a king or a queen, now you're on plan C. So in this example here, you kind of have two backup plans. So let's look at that. So let's say we have our gut shot, we have 4 outs, and we're going to keep 50 and 55. And let's drop this down to 12 cards we're going to bluff on the river. Let's drop this down to like 60%. So now we get our drop-off amounts. So the 50 became 40. So it dropped off by about 10%. And here the 33 became 23. So it dropped off about 10%. So yeah, you play around with these numbers and you get a feel for how much can I drop the immediately profitable number down. And just to point this out as well, you can look at what the EV is, so you can see, not only do I know that 40 is my break-even number, but when I'm getting folds 70% of the time, I have an EV of 56. So, it's telling you the break-evens, but it's also telling you exactly what the EV is. So, I think this tool is pretty useful because you really don't want to be using this immediately profitable number. You want to figure out what the true number is, and it's important to get a feel for how much can I drop this down by. So if you guys have any questions or anything, my email is azerner3@gmail.com. Shoot me an email. We can talk by email. We can Skype if you want to walk through it. We can study together. Whatever you guys want to do, I'm always here. And any feedback, definitely let me know what you think. If there's any features that you want me to add to this or anything that didn't make sense that I can make the tool easier to use, please let me know. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoy the tool.